Hello, my name is Michael Conneely, and this video is about when Saturn, Pluto and Ketu, the south node of the moon, combine. What is the individual natures of Saturn, Ketu and Pluto, and what happens when they combine? And I feel this is a really important video with crucial information, both about the effects in our everyday lives and consciousness, but also portraying the divine nature of each of these three planets. So more of that as we go through. And basically I'm doing it because there is a Saturn-Ketu-Pluto conjunction in Vedic Sagittarius throughout 2019. So I'm doing this in very early May 2019, and if you want to see where the three planets are in the heavens, look at my blog, the Astrology and Healing newsletter for May 2019, and indeed the earlier video and blog editions of the Astrology and Healing newsletter for January, February, March and April, as well as the great conjunction of Saturn, Ketu and Pluto was growing. So I offer this video and blog as an important resource for each of us, both now and indeed through our lives, because it really does set out in detail and exactness the different layers and levels of energies that stem from Saturn, Ketu and Pluto, and when each of them combine. So first of all, let's look at Saturn. What basically is the energy of Saturn? Well, Saturn demands that we do hard work. You are bound to work on your karmas. And Saturn can become a prison that we can build in a dysfunctional response to his nature, and because of childhood conditioning and so forth. And obviously you need to understand the detail of how Saturn will manifest in your life by looking at the signs and houses in your Vedic birth chart that Saturn occupies and rules, and of course cross-referring to psychodynamic Western astrology as well, and evolutionary Western astrology. So it's very important, by the way, to realise that every 28 years Saturn transits across your natal moon. So this is called Sade Sate. And as Saturn transits the sign before your natal moon, the sign of your natal moon, and the sign after your natal moon, that really is a time when Saturn's nature invades our life and consciousness with divine demands. And so we can experience it as a 7.5-year period of separation and death and suffering, of going down into a pit and then up again. But in fact, I want to say that the timetable for Sade Sate is more accurately described by Saturn's passages through the nakshatras before the moon's nakshatra, Saturn's passage through the moon's nakshatra, and Saturn's passage after the moon's nakshatra. That gives more accurate timing, particularly if Saturn is edge of sign, and it more accurately describes the sort of experiences you will have: agitation of mind, fool's paradise, etc. Final sting in the tail, it's all there. So I've given a hint of Saturn's nature: hard work, responsibility, ethics and karma. Now let's look at Pluto's nature, because remember the conjunction in the heavens at the moment is Saturn, Pluto and Ketu, the south node of the moon. Now I feel this is important stuff. I've studied Pluto a great deal, and basically, in my opinion, Pluto is analogous to atomic power in our life and in our consciousness. Pluto is essentially death and rebirth. And Pluto is essentially times where we have to descend into the underworld and then resurrect, as the ancient Mesopotamian myths of Inanna and Ishtar and Venus so wonderfully accurately describe. So when Pluto activates your life, there's so often a descent in the underworld to face and even feel incapacitated by your pains, guilts, secrets, our devastated feeling wounds, our sense of guilt and sin, cultural taboos, suspicions, or even negatively, Pluto negatively handled by human beings, the satanic, dark, evil magic, that sort of thing. But conversely, Pluto is the intrinsic power of good, of God. God can manifest through all situations, including through Pluto. And I can't stress strongly enough at this point the importance of the Tibetan Buddhist sense of the nature of demons. You see, the Tibetan Buddhist spirituality is tantric, and thus, potentially, everything in our lives, every situation is potentially connective to the divine, if only we can see it right. And because of course all phenomena is underlaid by the divine, and we have to realize this. So basically, I did a 5-year social anthropology field study, a university-based ethnography of spiritual forms new to the modern West, and and the ethnography means you have to live in the communities you study. And so I spent a lot of time in Tibetan Buddhist gompas, doing highest yoga tantras, arising as deity. And the point is that Tantra, when properly understood and practiced, does bring the highest connection to the divine light, and it's to achieve connection to the divine light that each of us incarnated. And so the divine purpose of Pluto, the Pluto transit or whatever, descent into the underworld, is that you arise having faced it all, having dealt with it all. Ideally, you arise freed from the weights that maybe you didn't realize were weighing you down before the descent into the underworld. And so if you go through that experience properly and with love and forgiveness and honesty, you then arise freed and empowered, ready to show and use and express your power. Pluto shows us how to learn about our power. Indeed, until we learn more as human beings, often we use our power in terrible ways. And that's part of the divine learning that we have to make in this life. So how you handle the descent phase into the underworld is crucial. And there are magical techniques of working with the abyss. So the abyss is beyond this world where, gods who are no longer worshipped by humanity exist and maybe subside, and secrets and powers are held. And indeed, this descent into the abyss time may be a good time to hand over dark material to the care of the keeper of the abyss. This is a magical technique which is extremely important and liberating and empowering. And the keeper of the abyss then ethically guards the material, whatever it is. And of course he may ask a price. So Pluto is, death and rebirth and coming into our power, not being weighed down. And so it's our evolutionary thrust in this life. So we need to learn to understand him and to hone our expression of his divine energy. How Pluto will manifest and how Pluto needs to express and evolve in our life, by the way, is nothing to do with the qualities of the house in the birth chart opposite the house in which Pluto occupies. Nothing at all. That's an artificial construct. Basically, Pluto is a matter of experiencing our darkness and then arising and coming into our power in an ethical way. Death and rebirth. The keys to understanding Pluto are mythic. They are not rational analytic. So here are two more huge issues to take on board in understanding the manifestation of Pluto, or indeed any planet in a human life. So the first of these is necessary to take on board is nature versus nurture. Are we the product of our nature, our inherited nature, or are we the product of our nurture, our earliest upbringing environment? And indeed, our earliest upbringing environment can massively alter our inherited nature self. And indeed, every reading I do, in all my courses, I use Megastar software, which has a wonderful dynamic counting table within it, a way of quantifying the effect of nurture environment on your nature. Well worth using. Tremendous understanding in that. And each of the constructs has a predictive unfolding. There are two age points, the individuation age point and the nodal age point, which are immensely valid prediction. So you have to take into account when understanding Pluto transits, both your nature and your nurture, because Pluto will work with both. And the other big issue is the zodiac. So basically in astrology there's the Western tropical zodiac and the Vedic sidereal zodiac. And the fact is that the Western tropical zodiac is based upon the position of the sun. So its start position is the position of the sun on the day of the vernal equinox. And therefore, because it's sun sign based, it's essentially about our egoic personality. But Vedic astrology, on the other hand, is anchored to a star, so it's sidereal. And so in a sense, Vedic astrology depicts our destiny, our incarnational life purpose, of which our egoic personality, charted by Western astrology, is just a part. So you also need to take into account, when assessing the Pluto effect, which zodiac you're using. Okay, having looked at Saturn and Pluto, now let's put the meaning of Saturn and Pluto together, because of course in 2019 the two are conjunct. So the point to make first is that Saturn and Pluto are apparently total enemies. I mean, Saturn is, structure and responsibility, whether negatively or positively understood by the person. Whereas Pluto is eruption of power. You know, the Pluto and Persephone myth, for example. And so they couldn't be more different. But that's life. The whole point is that in this life we incarnate to become the spiritual warrior and to get correct perception of the nature of the battlefield we're on from time to time in life. That's what we incarnated to experience and to suffer and to grow through. And it's no good saying, well, I'm going to honour Saturn, but I'm just not going to respond to Pluto at all. We have to be open to both. And in a tantric sense, we have to marry two opposites. That's what Tantra's all about. We have to ride two very different horses. So negatively, Saturn is our false security. But positively, Saturn exposes false security. So positively, Saturn gives needed form, diligence, hard work, strategy, learning through suffering, and hopefully then golden reaping. Saturn was originally an agricultural deity. I'm speaking to you from the beautiful mystic west of Ireland. I'm surrounded by fields and a mile from the ocean. The other inhabitants of our little five-house hamlet, have their little farms, and they work so hard to produce their harvest. So that's Saturn, whereas Pluto is about death and rebirth, descent into the underworld, and then needed power thrust. So security is an issue with both Saturn and Pluto in our lives. But so often, we need to be warned, we mustn't embrace false security. We can be brought up with spiritual dogmas or social cultural imposed dogmas which give an utterly false security, which in fact shut out our light and our greatness. So when we're handling Saturn and Pluto, we must be careful not to embrace false security, because they are merciless on the subject of false security. And Pluto-type false security is putting a lid on your instinctual urges and talents. And maybe your family conspired to do that because you'd have shown them up, had they not. So, but if you do put the lid on, your instincts, your talents, your creative sparks, they fester and they go bad, instead of exploding into manifestation in the light, which is what you're here for. Now I want to move on to the divine nature of each planet, because actually it's really important to understand it. Each planet has a soul or a divine nature or a deity. Everything has a soul, actually, and that was the understanding of Plato. And actually, Plato's understanding, the Platonic soul, actually comes from shamanic cultures surrounding a Greek civilization at the time Plato lived. And I remember when I was an undergraduate at Oxford being absolutely wowed by a book by E.R. Dodds called The Greeks and the Irrational, where he sort of decoded all this. It had a huge effect on me. And at the same time, I was living in a spiritual community in Glastonbury when I wasn't at Oxford. And there I was helped by Gareth Knight and Geoffrey Ash, who were working in the Arthurian current then in Glastonbury. So everything has a soul, and so each planet has a soul or a god. And actually Vedic astrology is immensely attuned to this. It's second nature, because of course Vedic astrology has such ancient roots. And indeed the Greeks and the Romans and the Celts knew that the planets had divine nature. The Babylonians knew. And the point is that when Vedic astrology was brought to the modern West, people like David Frawley heroically brought this crucial sense of the divine nature of each planet. And so it's very important to be aware of the divine nature of each planet. And indeed, I do vision journeys to meet, divine Jupiter, Brihaspati, or whatever. And I think that's getting lost in the Western reception of Vedic astrology. I mean, I feel Indian astrology, can go in for so much formulaic ranting and egoic stuff. But recently, certainly over the last couple of decades, I feel there's been a lot of formulaic blogging and almost ranting in the area of Vedic astrology in the West, and that's so unfortunate. We need to reconnect to the divine nature of each planet. So I actually do vision meetings online where you can meet the god of each planet, and people find it so healing. For example, at times when the divine nature of the planet is made hard for us humans to receive and perceive. So for example, when the planet is retrograde or in the Gandanta zone or in its sign of debility as described by Vedic astrology. I mean, Jupiter, as I speak, is retrograding in the Gandanta zone, and its future will be going alongside the Saturn Ketu Pluto conjunction and then into its sign of debility, Vedic Capricorn. And so, I've actually pinned up a picture of Jupiter the god, divine Brihaspati, on the wall beside me, so that I can see it and connect